So one of the consequences that came with the botched launch of Cyberpunk 2077 was the sheer amount of lawsuits that CD Projekt faced. Recall that the game launched to, while this is not the worst scores we've seen, generally we expected higher from CD Projekt, from Cyberpunk, given, this is what Witcher 3 looks like, and we all know the reasons behind why the score is lower with Cyberpunk. That rough launch really put a damper on what could have been just a home run of a launch and just the reputation of a once universally beloved company that people are now, while not hating on per se, more wary about. They've been making a comeback recently with Cyberpunk, which is great, and the developers clearly are talented and putting in the work, who are now getting more positive sentiments because of the work that they put in. The developers are not at fault for leadership decision to launch the game at an unreasonable time frame at a date where the developers knew this game is not going to be able to realize its full ambitions by then. So for the developers who, really pour their heart into this game and worked with the less than ideal situation that they were given, congrats to them for being able to make a comeback on Cyberpunk. But the way leadership, management, and executives handled the launch of the game, and the way they handled the marketing, and the way they misled investors and misled customers, all of that is still worthy of discussion. And today I want to talk about what's going on the investors' side of things who sued CD Projekt not long after that rough launch. It's not just customers who felt misled by statements like how Cyberpunk 2077 runs surprisingly good on PS4 and Xbox One, among other poorly aged statements like "this game will be out when it's ready" or "we leave the greed to others." The statement that the game runs surprisingly good on PS4 and Xbox One in particular is especially infamous given how unacceptable the performance was on those consoles, downright unplayable. In fact, it was so bad that you may recall at one point Sony removed and delisted Cyberpunk 2077 from the PlayStation Store and even offered refunds, which they're not particularly flexible about. And on the investor side of things, they're anticipating that this launch will be a home run and that'll increase the stock price of the CD Projekt Red company, and in turn they'll be able to make their investment worthwhile. But what happened instead was what investors felt was a misrepresentation of Cyberpunk 2077 as a product when it comes to its quality. And so back in December 20th, 2020, we got the following report whose headline reads, CD Projekt could face investor legal action over Cyberpunk misrepresentation. 2 law firms announced investigations into potential class action lawsuits. One firm was from Warsaw, and they had announced publicly that they were analyzing grounds for legal action. And then the second firm was New York-based law firm Wolf, Haldenstein, Adler, Freeman, and Hearst, and they were also looking into potential securities claims on behalf of shareholders of CD Projekt. Not long after came a third firm who were not just looking into potentially engaging in legal action and investigating, but actually did sue CD Projekt with a class action lawsuit. This was reported on December 24th, 2020. This firm is Rosen Law Firm. They filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of purchasers of the securities of CD Projekt between January 16th, 2020 and December 17th, 2020. So essentially they were representing investors who purchased CD Projekt securities within that 11-month period between January 6th and December 17th, 2020, the time period when Cyberpunk 2077's launch was imminent, the hype was at its peak, investors were hoping for returns. The lawsuit seeks to recover damages for CD Projekt investors under the federal securities laws. And the lawsuit essentially claimed the following. Number one, Cyberpunk 2077 was virtually unplayable on the current generation Xbox or PlayStation systems, current generation at the time meaning PS4 and Xbox One, due to an enormous number of bugs. Number two, as a result, Sony would remove Cyberpunk 2077 from the PlayStation Store, and Sony, Microsoft, and CD Projekt will be forced to offer full refunds for the game, negatively impacting the potential sales and commercial performance of Cyberpunk 2077, and in turn investors' confidence in the company, which in turn negatively impacts the stock price of CD Projekt. Number three, CD Projekt would suffer reputational and pecuniary harm. And number four, defendants' statements about its business, operations, and prospects were materially false and misleading and or lacked a reasonable basis at all relevant times. When the true details entered the market, the lawsuit claims that investors suffered damages. Essentially, the claim is that CD Projekt bullshitted a lot through their marketing, and they oversold and overhyped and overexaggerated a lot of their claims surrounding Cyberpunk 2077. Many customers also felt the same during Cyberpunk 2077's launch. Things have gotten much better now when it comes to the state of the game, but even now, there are aspects that the game doesn't quite live up to compared to what was initially hyped up. Now, of course, CD Projekt responded by stating on January 1st, 2021 that it's going to defend itself vigorously against these lawsuits. And then a few days later, on January 18th, 2021, CD Projekt would have to respond to another class action lawsuit that they were facing. At this point, there were essentially 4 major class action lawsuits that eventually combined into one back in May 19th, 2021, as reported here by Video Games Chronicle. 4 class action lawsuits over Cyberpunk's troubled launch are combining. All 4 lawsuits will now be subject to potential common court proceedings. About a week later, it was reported that this combined lawsuit would be something that'd be filed in court in June of 2021. And then June 2021 happened to be right around the time when Cyberpunk 2077 returned to the PlayStation Store after updates and hotfixes. And then at the end of 2021, on December 8th, it'd be reported that CD Projekt has entered settlement talks with investors who sued over its botched Cyberpunk launch. Now, we wouldn't get much in the way of updates surrounding all of this until a little over a year later, on January 6, 2023, when Video Games Chronicle published the following article whose headline reads, CD Projekt to settle Cyberpunk 2077 investor lawsuit for $1.85 million. So settlement discussions seemingly went well. For a company the size of CD Projekt, $1.85 million is a slap on the wrist. It's barely a dent. This right here is basically a drop in the bucket for them, and I wouldn't really call this substantial reparations or anything that comes close to severe enough consequence that it'd make a company like CD Projekt think twice about pulling what they did with Cyberpunk 2077's launch. This is a huge downgrade from a previous estimate that total potential damages could be as high as $11 million. The $1.85 million settlement represents 16.8% of the estimated recoverable damages. And if we want to get into more specifics, this will result in compensation of approximately 49 cents per eligible share of CD Projekt securities. It'll be used to pay class members, settlement administration costs, taxes, attorneys' fees and costs, and incentive awards for the plaintiffs. Remember all that fervor that Rosen Law Firm had here with all these claims that were highly accurate about the unethical practices surrounding Cyberpunk 2077's launch and marketing? Where did all that fervor go? And look, I'm not saying this because I'm out to bring down CD Projekt or anything like that. I'm glad that Cyberpunk is making a recovery, and fingers crossed that lessons were learned from Cyberpunk 2077's launch, and that CD Projekt understands that their reputation and the positive sentiments that they once had universally across the gaming community was a big part of their success. And so hopefully in their attempts to recoup that, they'll make sure a mistake like this never happens again. And they've already taken steps like shifting to Unreal Engine instead of using the Red engine, whose development and the technical troubleshooting surrounding it hampered development for Cyberpunk 2077. Hopefully the shift to Unreal Engine will make development processes smoother, and they can focus on just creating rather than technical troubleshooting, and will lead to just smoother, better development cycles and launches. And I wish CD Projekt the best. At the same time, though, that doesn't mean that Cyberpunk 2077's rough launch and the leadership at CD Projekt sort of enabling the rough launch and the deception surrounding it should be forgotten. You know what I mean? There should still be consequences for that particular instance, enough so that both CD Projekt and other companies across the world will realize that, oh shit, there are actually consequences to our unethical actions. Companies won't be dissuaded from engaging in shady business practices if they look at situations like these and realize, oh, we can do this and only have to pay $1.85 million, which is nothing compared to the war chest that we have. This feels less like a punishment and more like just a small tax to pay to be able to get away with deceptive marketing practices or shady business practices or just treating consumers in a way that isn't adequate. Now, this lawsuit specifically involves investors, and if they wanted to make a quick buck, I guess they got that. They can split up the $1.85 million, which when split up still doesn't seem like a whole lot. But in terms of making a stand about CD Projekt needing to make reparations for all these claims right here, which again I think are all true, this just really feels like a weak outcome that really didn't move the needle all that much. And that lack of a consequence that will actually make a dent on a company means that, you know, companies can decide one day, you know what, this one's, let's do that shady thing again, because all we have to do is pay a small tax. That's it. we don't really have to pay much for it. Now, I do remember reading a story back in January of 2021 where it was reported that CD Projekt Red could be fined 10% of its annual income by Polish government if Cyberpunk 2077 patches don't fix the game. Stuff like that seems more adequate, where they're not going to completely bankrupt CD Projekt per se, but fined 10% of its annual income, like that would definitely make a dent. That would definitely pressure CD Projekt to fix a game that absolutely needs to be fixed. And while part of the reason why they fixed Cyberpunk is because they understand that reputation is important and they needed to fix the game to win back the customer's trust, if you can call it that, just some kind of goodwill. Additional consequences from government officials just makes it that much less likely that leadership will think that they can get away with something like this again. It will make them think twice before thinking, you know what, maybe we can just rush this game out. But this right here is more of a fix your game or else type of situation. When it comes to direct consequences for the way Cyberpunk 2077 was launched, I just haven't really seen a lot of legal activity against it, and what little activity there has been has resulted in settlements that, again, that's as good as a single minute paper cut for a company like CD Projekt. I've just not seen any sort of mobilization to actually hold CD Projekt accountable. And I'm not just talking about CD Projekt, honestly. This is just a games industry-wide thing, and plenty of other industries get away with shady shit because corporations have the manpower, resources, the legal means, and the lawyers to be able to skirt the law, essentially, to just barely be legal enough with their actions, or just some industries are just not regulated as much as others. The games industry is nowhere near as regulated as it should be, so that doesn't help matters when it comes to keeping game companies accountable. And with this lawsuit not amounting to much, you know, this just kind of feels like a situation that fizzled out, that everyone thought maybe this could be a big deal and maybe this could start teaching game companies to stop doing shady things. Because regardless of whether something is moral or not, if a company can legally get away with something that will ultimately make them more money or will allow them to meet certain financial quotas that will make investors happy and the like, then they'll go for it. Now, Cyberpunk 2077's launch was rough enough that even on the investor side of things, it all completely backfired, and they faced criticism from all fronts, from journalists, from game reviewers, from content creators, from critics, from consumers, and from investors, and it was just a complete disaster. So that should serve as motivation for CD Projekt to not repeat history, but I also do think that tangible legal consequences and fines and all these things do need to be more severe to just add an extra layer of security. But in the games industry in particular, progress surrounding regulation has just been really slow, and unfortunately the law has always been a very slow-moving entity, so it'll be a while before I think the games industry's regulations are at a place where it's satisfactory and where the consequences feel like they match the crime, if you will. But I don't know, until then, these are the kinds of settlements and fees and fines that game companies are expected to pay. Again, just a drop in the bucket compared to what it actually should be. So that's everything you need to know about the investor lawsuits against CD Projekt and how that all came to a rather weak conclusion. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on how this whole situation played out and what you think about just the general lack of consequences or severe enough consequences against game companies. Is that something you agree with? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.